There are places where grief becomes visible, where it takes a physical form that cannot be ignored or explained away. And at San Diego International Airport in California, grief took the form of a gray tabby cat named Atlas who appeared at Terminal 2 on March 15, 2019, and refused to leave, refused to be caught, refused to accept that the person he was waiting for would never walk through those arrival doors again. And for 847 days, airport security personnel tried everything to remove him. Tried traps and tranquilizers and professional animal catchers. But Atlas had chosen his post and nothing would move him. And on day 847, when a Transportation Security Administration officer named Patricia Reeves finally decided to check the database one more time, when she entered a search that no one had thought to try before, she discovered why Atlas was there. Discovered a story so heartbreaking that it made national news and changed airport policy across the country. The cat first appeared on a Thursday morning during the early shift change. Appeared sitting near gate 27 in the arrivals area, sitting in the exact spot where passengers from military charter flights would emerge after returning from deployment. And the janitorial staff noticed him first. Noticed because cats do not belong in airports. Do not belong in secure areas past TSA checkpoints. And they called security thinking someone's pet had escaped from a carrier. And when security arrived, the cat was still there, was sitting perfectly still watching the arrivals door, and when they tried to catch him, he bolted, ran through the terminal with a speed that made capture impossible. And 15 minutes later, he was back in the exact same spot, back watching that same door. The security team assumed the cat was a stray that had somehow gotten into the terminal, assumed he would eventually leave or could be trapped, and they set up humane traps with food, set them near where the cat was stationed, but Atlas never went near them, never showed interest in food or water or anything except that arrivals door. And over the first week, dozens of passengers reported seeing the cat, reported that he would approach people coming through the door, would smell their boots and uniforms, would look at their faces, and then would return to his waiting position. And the airport brought in animal control specialists who said they had never seen behavior like this, had never seen a cat so focused on a single location. If you have ever witnessed dedication that borders on supernatural, if you have ever seen something refuse to abandon hope when all logic says hope is gone, subscribe to this channel right now, because what happened over the next 2 years at San Diego International Airport will prove that some animals understand loss in ways that humans can barely comprehend. Hit that like button if you believe that grief is not exclusive to humans, and drop a comment telling me what city and country you are watching from, because this story belongs to everyone who has ever waited for someone who will never come home. By week 3, Atlas had become a fixture at Terminal 2, had become something that airport staff worked around, and Patricia Reeves, a Transportation Security Administration officer who had been working at the airport for 12 years, became the unofficial coordinator of what everyone started calling the cat situation. And she documented everything, documented when Atlas appeared, where he went, how he behaved. And she noticed that the cat had a pattern, would be at gate 27 during specific hours, would disappear for parts of the day, but would always return for the evening arrivals. And Patricia started checking the flight schedules and realized that Atlas was present for every military charter arrival, was there every time Marines or sailors or soldiers came home from deployment. The airport attempted removal 17 times in the first 2 months, attempted using professional trappers and animal behaviorists and every humane method available, and each time Atlas would evade capture, would disappear into the infrastructure of the terminal through vents and service corridors and spaces that should have been too small for a cat to access, and he would reappear hours later in the exact same spot. And the airport director received complaints from passengers, received concerns that a stray animal was a health code violation and a security risk. But Patricia argued that Atlas was not aggressive, was not approaching food service areas, was simply waiting, and she convinced her supervisors to let her try a different approach. Patricia started sitting near Atlas during her breaks, started sitting 10 feet away just observing, and over weeks she moved closer, moved incrementally until she was sitting 3 feet from where Atlas maintained his vigil, and the cat tolerated. Her presence seemed to understand that she was not trying to remove him. And Patricia started talking to him, started speaking in the gentle voice that people use with traumatized animals. And she told Atlas that she understood waiting, told him about her own brother who had died in Afghanistan in 2011, who had come home through this very terminal. And she told Atlas that sometimes the people we wait for do not come back, but that does not mean the waiting was pointless. Month 4 arrived and Atlas was still there, had lost weight despite the food that Patricia and other sympathetic staff members left for him, and a veterinarian who worked with the airport agreed to examine Atlas from a distance using binoculars. Agreed because Atlas would not allow anyone to touch him, and the vet said the cat was approximately 4 years old, was neutered, showed signs of having been a well-cared-for pet, was not feral, was not a stray that had wandered in, was a cat who had belonged to someone and who was clearly looking for that someone. And Patricia made a decision that would eventually solve the mystery. She began approaching military personnel who came through Gate 27, began asking if anyone recognized the gray tabby cat, if anyone had lost a pet or knew someone who had, and for months, no one had answers. No one recognized. And in month 7, a Marine gunnery sergeant named Rodriguez stopped and looked at the photo for a long time and said that cat looks like one that belonged to a guy in my unit. Belonged to a Lance Corporal named Derek Chen who had died in a training accident 18 months ago. And Patricia felt her heart stop because 18 months ago was approximately when Atlas had first appeared. Patricia obtained Derek Chen's service record through official channels. Obtained it because her supervisor agreed this was now a matter that deserved investigation. And she learned that Lance Corporal Derek Chen had been 23 years old, had been stationed at Camp Pendleton 30 miles north of San Diego, had died during a live fire training exercise in October 2018, and his body had been flown home to his family in Oregon for burial, and there was no mention of a pet in his personal effects, no record of a cat, but Patricia knew that military records do not always include pets, especially if the pet was not officially registered on base. She contacted Derek's unit, contacted the Marine Corps liaison, and explained the situation. And she was given contact information for Derek's roommate, a corporal named James Liu who had shared off-base housing with Derek, and when Patricia called James and described Atlas, described the gray tabby with the white patch on his chest, James went silent for a long moment and then said, "Oh my God, that is Derek's cat. That is Atlas. We thought he ran away after Derek died. We searched for weeks but never found him." And Patricia asked James where they had lived, where Derek and Atlas had lived together. And James said they had an apartment in Oceanside, which was 20 miles from the airport. And Patricia understood that Atlas had somehow traveled 20 miles to get to this airport. James explained that Derek had adopted Atlas as a kitten 3 years earlier, had found him at a shelter, and had said the cat reminded him of his childhood pet. And Derek had brought Atlas everywhere regulations allowed, and every time Derek deployed or went on training exercises, every time he left, he would tell Atlas, "I will come back through the airport. I will come back through those doors. You wait for me, and I will always come back." And James said it was a ritual, was something Derek did every time, would hold the cat and promise he would return through the airport. And 3 days before the training accident, Derek had left for what was supposed to be a 2-week exercise, had held Atlas and made the same promise, and he never came home. Patricia started crying when James told her this, started crying there in the security office because she understood that Atlas had gone to the airport because that was where Derek had promised he would return, had promised every single time. He left, and the cat had been waiting for 846 days because he believed his human was coming back through those doors. And Patricia said to James, "We have been trying to remove him. We have been trying to trap him and take him away from the only place where he thinks Derek will appear. And James said Derek would not want that, would want Atlas to be cared for, but would understand why the cat needed to wait. The story leaked to local media within days. Leaked because airport staff could not stop talking about it. Could not stop talking about the cat who had traveled 20 miles to wait at an airport because his Marine had promised to come home that way, and the San Diego news stations ran the story. Ran footage of Atlas sitting at his post, and the story went regional and then national. And suddenly San Diego International Airport was receiving calls from across the country, was receiving calls from military families and veterans and people who had lost someone and who understood what Atlas was doing. And the airport director made an announcement that Atlas would be allowed to stay, would be designated as an emotional support animal for the airport, would be provided with food and water and veterinary care. And Gate 27 became known as Atlas's Gate. Patricia became Atlas's primary caretaker, became the person who brought him food and water and who sat with him during her shifts. And she noticed that Atlas had stopped approaching every person who came through the arrivals door, had stopped checking everyone, and she thought maybe the cat was giving up, was accepting that Derek was not coming. But then she realized that Atlas was still watching, was still at his post, was just conserving energy, and she understood that Atlas would wait until he physically could not wait anymore, would wait because the promise had been made and the cat believed in promises. Month 18 arrived and Atlas was noticeably older, was moving slower, was sleeping more, and the airport veterinarian said the cat was healthy but was aging rapidly, was aging in the way that animals age when they are under prolonged stress. And Patricia started bringing a soft bed for Atlas, started bringing a heated pad for cold nights. And the cat accepted these comforts, but never left his spot, never stopped watching that door, and Patricia would sit with him and talk about Derek. Would tell Atlas stories about her brother, who had also been a Marine, who had also made promises he could not keep. And she felt like she was keeping vigil, not just for Atlas but for every person who had ever waited for someone who would never arrive. On day 847, on a Tuesday morning in February 2021, Patricia was sitting with Atlas during her break, and she was looking at the memorial page that Derek's family had created online, was looking at photos of Derek with Atlas. And she noticed something in one of the photos, noticed that Derek was wearing a bracelet with coordinates engraved on it. And the caption said Derek never took off his deployment bracelet with the coordinates of his first station overseas. And Patricia had an idea that seemed impossible, but that she had to try. She contacted James Liu again and asked if he still had any of Derek's belongings. Asked specifically if he had the bracelet, and James said he did. Said Derek's parents had given it to him after the funeral because James had been Derek's closest friend, and Patricia asked if she could borrow it, asked if James would be willing to bring it to the airport, and James drove down that afternoon. Drove down with the bracelet and with a photo album of Derek and Atlas. And Patricia took the bracelet and she walked to where Atlas was waiting, and she knelt down 3 feet away, the closest she had ever been, and she held out her hand with the bracelet and said, "Atlas, I brought you something that smells like Derek." The cat looked at her hand, looked at the bracelet, and he stood up for the first time in hours. And he walked toward Patricia, walked slowly, and he smelled the bracelet, smelled it for a long moment. And then he did something he had not done in 847 days. He rubbed his face against Patricia's hand, rubbed against her, with the kind of affection that cats show to people they trust. And Patricia started crying again. Started crying because she understood that Atlas recognized Derek's scent, recognized it on this object, and the cat had accepted that this was the closest he would get to his Marine coming home. Atlas lived for 6 more months after that day, lived at the airport with Patricia caring for him, and he stopped maintaining the rigid vigil, stopped sitting at attention watching the door, would sleep more, would accept affection from Patricia and other staff members. And when he died in August 2021, he died peacefully in Patricia's arms in the airport veterinary office. and the airport held a memorial service, held it at Gate 27 with full military honors, and Marines from Camp Pendleton attended in dress uniform. And they placed a plaque at Gate 27 that reads, "In memory of Atlas, who taught us that loyalty does not end with death, and that some promises are kept in the waiting." And Patricia says that every time she works a shift and sees military personnel coming through those doors, she thinks of Atlas, thinks of Derek Chen, who made a promise to a cat, and she thinks of her own brother, and she understands that airports are not just places where people arrive and depart. They are places where love waits, where hope persists, where grief becomes visible. And if this story has moved you, if you believe that animals grieve and love and remember in ways that put humans to shame, subscribe to this channel for more true stories about the animals whose loyalty transcends death. Hit that like button if you have ever waited for someone who did not come home, and leave a comment sharing a time when an animal showed you what real devotion looks like. Because these stories matter, these moments when animals prove they understand loss better than we do matter, and I will see you in the next story.